We have our panelists here today that represent various facets, and they will introduce themselves in a moment. My name is Trina Koboldik, and I'm the Director of Student Services at ISKL. I oversee our English as Additional Language, Learning Resource, Life-Centered Education, and Counseling programming, and really work towards programs for inclusion at our school. And my co-moderator is Azra Pathan.
Good morning. I am Azra Pathan. I'm the Director of Learning at ISKL, and I oversee the curriculum, instruction, and assessment here, as well as all of the other programs that happen here at ISKL. Welcome.
And we are so lucky to have our panelists here today who will introduce themselves in a moment as they answer the first question. Before we proceed to that, we'd like to frame this a little bit with the why that we're doing this work. Why do we talk about inclusion, belonging, diversity, equity, justice? You've heard a lot of these words at ISKL, and those words can mean so many different things to different people. And what's important to us at the end of the day is what it means to our students when they go out after ISKL and they're navigating the world. That's really what we need to know. So one of the things we have done is started surveying our alumni students. And these quotes that you see in front of you are some of the responses that our alumni said about their experience at ISKL. Their experiences have shaped them into who they are today, because it's been an international experience. How important that connection is from a variety of backgrounds. They enter into worlds that they are navigating a variety of different backgrounds.
And they're traveling around the world. So once they leave ISKL, as you see with our high school counseling program and the careers and universities that they go through, it is literally around the globe. And so this first quote from a student from the University of Melbourne really focuses on this idea that even though you're white and you fit as a Kiwi, this person found that this international diverse background made them different. And so even though they might look like the group they're in, they might not feel like they're part of that group. And so it's really important. That's a great realization for us as we go into learning. And the last comment was from another student who said, in Malaysia, a former student, I didn't really consider myself a minority because literally everyone was different in their unique ways. But I'm definitely a minority here in Utah. So I think that the framing of our conversation around inclusion and belonging is this notion of, are we getting our students ready for a world beyond ISKL?
You can see in these quotes right here, the students, our alumni, they do challenge us. They challenge us to be more honest. You know, we're really lucky. ISKL is such a great place for belonging and inclusion, and we will continue to foster it. And we need to prepare students for the reality of the challenges they will face beyond these walls and in the greater world. They said, tell us insights about the world. Don't cushion us. And listen to everyone and their ideas. As teachers, we want to wrap up our students. We want to protect them. We want to cushion them. And at the same time, we know that we can't protect them from everything. And you as parents, I'm sure, can relate to that. You want to protect your children from everything as much as you possibly can. And then there's the reality of the world out there that we prepare them for, and we ultimately leave them to, and we need to make sure they have the skills to navigate it, because we can't be there in every situation that they're going to encounter. And when we hear these experiences, you know, I'm reminded of the why that we do diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at ISKL. I'm reminded of our values and why we stay true to those values. And our panelists here today are going to speak very much about their own experiences and why it's important to them. So we'll start with you, Joey, and go through all of our panelists to please introduce yourselves and tell us why, in your context and from your perspective, inclusion and belonging are so very important to you.
Thanks, Trina. Hi, my name is Joey. I'm a middle school counselor. And just a little bit of background about me. I'm originally from the Philippines. I grew up going to an international school. I went to college in the US, and then I came back, and I've lived and worked in the US, in the Philippines, in South Korea, and now Malaysia. And I can relate to a lot of our students and your children on many levels. And the reason why I care so deeply about DEIJ is I really feel like when students feel like they belong and they feel a sense of purpose and they feel like their identities are celebrated and they can just be whoever they want to be, when they have that freedom, it really contributes to their holistic development, not just as learners, but as individuals as well. Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Safa Arshadullah, and I am an alumni of ISKL. I graduated in the class of 2016. My family moved to Malaysia in 2009, so I started in grade 6 at ISKL. I graduated and moved on to university in Southern California. I went to a liberal arts college, and then I continued my studies in London for my master's, and I currently work at a behavioral and cultural insights firm in New York. And equity and inclusion is just the core of everything I do, not just from the experiences that I've had growing up, but also in the job that I do is connecting the dots of understanding people and cultures and why the world works the way it does. And there's no way to do that without understanding the different identities and experiences that every single person in this world goes through.
My name is Lynn. I'm one of the elementary counselors here at ISKL. This is my third international school, so I've been lucky enough to work in Beijing and also in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Before coming here, I'm also the very proud mother of an adopted daughter from China. And so one of the things that is so important to me about this idea of equity and belonging and inclusion is that all of our students want to understand themselves, they want to be understood by others, and they want to make that positive impact on the world. And being able to start with very young children and giving them those opportunities, I think, is vital to their belonging, to their understanding of themselves, and growing in this wonderful world that we have.
Hi, my name's Sana. I'm currently a grade 11 student in the IB program. And I'm what you call a third culture kid. I was born in India. Within a year, I moved to Sri Lanka, then I moved to Vietnam, then I moved to Taiwan, and then I finally came to Malaysia. But ISKL is not even my first school here. I was at another school for about 10 years, and then I came here. So I definitely know what it's like to be new. I know what it's like to not fit in, because as a third culture kid, it's difficult because I can't relate to my own culture as much. I've never lived in India, but at the same time, I'm not exactly Malaysian either, and so that difficulty of navigating that. And so I first had to know what it's like to sometimes feel a little excluded, but I also know what it's like to feel included, to feel like I belong to the community. I feel like I belong to the ISKL community, and it's really helped me grow into a confident person, a confident leader that feels that she can, take part in whatever extracurriculars that I want to. It's helped me become successful, and I definitely think that DEIJ, sometimes it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's so important that all students feel like their voices are heard, because when that happens, the amount of positive change that is possible you can't imagine it.
All right, so we have a great conversation ahead for you. You can see our panelists have a variety of perspectives that they're going to share with us, and we'll start our first question with Sana. Sana, can you tell us a little bit about what learning looks like around equity and inclusion at the high school, and what have you learned from these processes?
I think DEIJ, there's a variety in ways that it's addressed, but I think the two main avenues are through student leadership as a platform, and I think one area is through assembly. So as a part of DEIJ, the two main initiatives we have are assemblies and advisory sessions, and it's a great combination because through these large-scale assemblies, we're able to talk to the entire student body and often just tackle these difficult conversations about social issues. So a quick example I'll give is we had an assembly on inclusion. And so we had 3 panelists come in. One was a student with diabetes, another was a student with ADHD, and we had a student that came into the school with English as an additional language. And we were able to hear their perspectives, hear their challenges, also hear some of the great things they experienced, but a lot of it was understanding that not everyone often feels like they belong, and it's really important to recognize that, because only after that can we improve as a community. And after that in advisories, and contrastingly, we have these small-scale discussions where we talk about our own perspectives. They're very open discussions where the students can talk with their classmates, talk about how the assembly made them feel, talk about situations. And so for Women's Empowerment Month, another example, we talked about the term double standards, what that meant to us. We talked about our own experiences facing sexism. As a woman, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to be told you can't play football because you're a girl. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I think having these conversations, it can be a little uncomfortable, but having them really helps people see what's around them, and it also helps them improve. It helps you connect with your classmates. And I think through those two avenues, it's a great way to discuss these issues and have the entire student body discuss them, because only then can we improve, can we become a community where everyone feels included, where it's diverse, everyone feels like they're given justice to do what they want, everyone's equal.
Thanks, Anna, for sharing about that. The student leadership team events that your group has put together has been phenomenal. I can say that personally, having been in those assemblies, the inclusion assembly, the voices our students bring and the perspectives are just so very powerful, and the learning that's behind it. And it's different than it was when I was in school. I like to think that I'm young, but I'm really not anymore. I forget that sometimes. And then when I talk to students, I realize just how different their experiences are from our own right now. In that, Zafa, you've navigated from ISKL, then gone to the US, to California for university, to London for your master's, and back to the US in your current job. How have you navigated those cross-cultural differences?
I think the one thing that I can think of just as the banner is that you never know what you're going to expect. And I moved to California for university knowing that I was going to a small school, knowing that I had a very different life experience to a lot of people that I was going to be peers with, having grown up in multiple countries, going to an international school. I knew that the US is a very monocultural society, but I didn't know how much that was gonna kind of shake my confidence in my identities. And it became kind of a matter of developing my confidence in contrast or in tension to the world that I was living in university. And so it became an opportunity for me to kind of reevaluate what are my identities as a woman, as a Muslim woman, as an Indian American woman, as a third culture kid, as so many different things happening all at the same time, but the people around me couldn't necessarily understand that. So what that meant was I just became really intentional about the people that I was spending time with, and not necessarily being around only other international students who know what that experience is like, but also finding people who are just as curious about the world as I am. And so that obviously brings about a diverse group of people that you become friends with. So it became a matter of kind of building that support system with people with similar mindsets, not necessarily the same experiences. When I moved to London, that was a very different experience because the country itself, while is like very kind of homogenous in some ways, is also extremely diverse. Sorry, not the country. London itself as a city is very diverse. And so I was able to kind of celebrate my identities and my international life experiences in a way that I hadn't in a small college town in California, because I was around other people who also had international backgrounds, many, many people who had international backgrounds, not necessarily people who went to international schools, but who also lived in London as international expats or foreigners or workers. And there were simply more Malaysian restaurants, there were simply more cultural events that I could attend where I was like, oh, okay. I'm able to celebrate these experiences that are really important to me, eat the food that I miss so much, and be around people who also find joy in those things. So it was a matter of, again, building those relationships and finding opportunities to kind of reconnect and kind of solidify my experiences as an international student.
Thank you. So exploring identities is an important part of that experience, and we talk about multiple identities, that as one person you can have so many identities, and we can identify in different groups. So this next question is for Lynn. Lynn, can you define for us what identity is, and how do we help our students, especially the young ones, learn about their identities and themselves and how they can feel a sense of belonging?
Yeah, absolutely. So identity can be broken down really simply. It's the way we see ourselves, it's the way we want to be seen by other people, and it's where we feel we belong and we fit. And this is so multifaceted because we have so many different parts of our identity. So we can look at this idea of being a third culture kid or a cross-cultural kid. We can look at the fact that we're ISKL students, that's part of our identity. We look at the fact that some of us are siblings and some of us are not. Our family makeup, right? Are we living with our grandparents? Are we living with grandparents and parents and aunts and uncles? Are we living in a one-parent home? There's also the background that we're coming from, both culturally and racially. There's countries we've lived in. So there's so many pieces that go into what is our identity, and helping students to understand that can start from such a young age. It doesn't have to be something that we are exploring just as kids get older, because all kids kind of are relating to these things, right? And they're understanding these things. And so as we read stories and we're looking at the windows and the mirrors in these stories of, oh, I look like that, or my family's like that, or I lived in that country. So there's all these pieces that go into place for these kids to be able to understand and to explore that with each other. And then there's this idea of finding what is unique about you and celebrating that, but then also finding the things that are the similar between you and other people and exploring that and celebrating that and growing with those experiences. And as we do this, we do it really in a developmentally appropriate way, right? We're gonna start where the kids are, and then we build as we go along, and we're answering questions that they're asking, and we're providing information that is where they're at and meeting them there. So we just start with those conversations and go on. And we're building these, call them identity-safe classrooms, where everybody's identity and all the parts of their identity are valued and explored and celebrated.
Thank you. So we can see that the similarities and differences are an asset for us, and having conversations around that is important. Joey, how does that change in the middle school? What are middle schoolers grappling with, and how do they explore their identities?
Well, middle schoolers are fascinating. I love working with middle schoolers, and those of you who had middle schoolers or who currently have middle schoolers know that they're just so interested in their social relationships, but also their personal development. And there's a shift that occurs from elementary school where they're curious about themselves and what they're interested in and who they are as people. And suddenly they go to middle school, and it's almost like the aperture widens so much, and they're thinking about who are my friends, and rather who are my best friends, and who are my class friends, and who are my after-school activity friends. They're so interested in the world around them and the people around them. And I think that's such a fascinating thing about identity and belonging in middle school is they're not just focused on themselves and what they like and what they're into, but they're also interested in, whoa, what are my friends into? And how can I get along with these people? And what are the TV shows and the movies and the memes and the emojis that these people like? And how can I get closer to these people? And the really fascinating thing along with that is that it's constantly shifting and changing too. So you'll have a student who says, well, I really identify as a track and field runner, for example, and I love that. And then they'll come back 2 weeks later, actually, I think I'd rather be a swimmer. Can I be both? So they're really, really curious about their interests and the people around them. And I think it's such a fertile time for them to be encouraged and to really think about, okay, where do you belong? Where could you belong? And what is your story? And also encouraging them to be curious about other people's stories. And I think the really great thing about being a middle school counselor and also teaching them health, I teach them health as well, is to get them interested in stories. Get them interested in where are other people coming from, and be open to other people's perspectives. Be open to different ideas, because that is really the time when they're curious about that. So I think middle school is such an awesome time to really get kids interested in where am I, but also where are other people, and how can I make those connections, and how can I build those stories with other people, which I think is really fascinating and great.
Thanks, Joey. I can attest to middle schoolers being a very fun and interesting group after having just spent a full week with them tenting in the jungle. And their sense of identity and it being moldable and fluid is really something that we need to carry with us throughout our lives, because our careers change, our environments change, our interests change, our family dynamics may change. So many different things change within our lives that we need to navigate and come back to, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my sense of self, and how do I stay true to my own values and my own family and my own culture? Sana, in high school, the high schoolers are faced with increasing complexity in their relationships, in the issues that they deal with in their academics, etc. What skills does ISKL foster to help high schoolers navigate that?
Well, I definitely think that, to begin with, like, it's very complex. You're dealing with academics, you're dealing with new friend groups, new friends, new people. All of a sudden, you're going from middle school to this big high school with so many grades, from grade 9 to grade 12, and it's very challenging. It's not easy. I mean, I'm in the IB myself right now, and I'm struggling. But I think ISKL does a lot, especially with belonging and inclusion. I think one really important area is cultural competence and this idea of being a global citizen, and that's really celebrated here at ISKL. Being a third culture kid, it wasn't easy, but the minute I came to ISKL, I felt like I belonged with the community, because everywhere I went, it was like, me too, like I feel the same way. I'm also a third culture kid, and being able to relate to not only those other students, but even students who don't identify as a third culture kid, because everyone in the school just appreciates other people's cultures. I mean, we have over 70 nationalities, and I think, festivals like iFest, it's an opportunity to get to know other cultures, and only by understanding other cultures, other identities, other nationalities, can we develop stronger connections as a community. And then on top of that, this is definitely a skill built in the classroom, but critical thinking, I think people often limit it to just the classroom, like just to being in an English essay or maybe a social science. But it's more than that. Critical thinking at its core is teaching you to evaluate perspectives, to evaluate evidence, assess whether something is true or not, challenge biases, challenge assumptions. And this can be taken out outside of the classroom. When you're in the cafeteria and you hear something that you don't agree with, critical thinking tells you to think about what the other person has said, think about what they're saying, what you're saying, where's the common ground. And it helps with these conversations of DEIJ. It helps you challenge that maybe this isn't right, this isn't fair. And that's how we begin to improve. And I think last but not least, empathy, because that's what connects us all. At the end of the day, we all love school, we all love ISKL, we all are humans, we're in this school. And I think hearing other people's stories through those assemblies, it helps you understand what it's like in the other person's shoes. You can put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand what it's like from their perspective, and then you understand that, oh, this needs to change, or I need to make this person feel more included. Because I think if you think about the other person, you think about, oh, what is it like to feel isolated, and you think about your own personal experience with that, then you realize how important it is that everyone feels included, that everyone feels like they belong. And I think ISKL does a really good job at helping you understand this with all three of those skills and ideas. And I feel like I feel like I've grown as a person who can recognize these things around me, that can notice when someone's feeling down, or can point out maybe an injustice or something that's happening that's unfair. And this just helps us improve as students.
So thank you, Sana. The idea of curiosity and multiple perspectives, critical thinking, and how you respond to those various changes are an important part of learning here at ISKL. And I'm thinking, both as a parent and as an educator, how hard it was in COVID. How hard it was that our students were not getting these opportunities to make these mistakes, to encourage them to have these interactions. They were so limited. And so the richness of the school environment is such an important one. The next question is for you, Safa, as you think about, because you were here from 6th grade here at ISKL, and then as you think about all the things that you've done beyond it, what are some the specific skills that you kind of reflect on that you've learned here at ISKL, but also what experiences did you have that shaped you into a global citizen?
Like Sana, critical thinking is pretty much the skill that has carried me through my time after ISKL. The idea of challenging assumptions, the idea of challenging the information that you're getting, the sources, all of that happened particularly for me in my humanities classes. It wasn't necessarily the IB itself, it was my teachers. In my HL Lit class, Mr. Venables provided a curriculum that was based in post-colonial literature. And I learned when I left ISKL, when I was in university and in my master's program, that some people don't even know what post-colonialism or anti-colonialism is. And having that historical context, not just in my literature class, but also from Miss Painter's IB history class, where we learned history about Southeast Asia and China and Russia from a non-Western lens as well, was really important to the kind of academic experience that I had, especially in undergrad. Also, even little things like annotating and being able to go in depth into a paper, understanding claims, evidences, and interpretations. Those were not necessarily skills that my peers had. And so that was a huge leg up, I think, that I had simply because of the ISKL experience. Another moment, I think, or another kind of experience throughout my time at ISKL was GAP and being just able to travel. And it also put into question the privileges that we have as international students. The kind of questions around what voluntourism and kind of the savior aspect to traveling also looks like. And that was something actually my class brought into question very kind of obviously in a way that hadn't been done before, because some of the trips that we had were simply built on, we're going to this country to build a wall for this house and then we're gonna leave. And a lot of us were like, okay, so? Like, do the people that we're visiting actually want that? Is that useful? Is that helpful? Are we just doing something because we're coming from a different socioeconomic status? And so, again, questioning those things that we were experiencing was very important, but also being able to travel and simply just absorbing and connecting with different cultures was a huge life skill that came from those trips and kind of created those unique points that you were talking about to your identities.
Steph, it's so fascinating that I hear questioning coming up over and over again. It seems to be a theme throughout, and even what our alumni surveys have said, how questioning in the academic setting sets you up in that safe space and in those conversations that are really authentic in the classroom to then do it in other contexts. And really proud to hear that your peers were asking those questions about GAP programming, because those questions continue to be part of the programming and what we ask ourselves on a regular basis now. So we do get better because of our students, truly. Lynn, I'm going to pivot a bit and go back to elementary school and ask you a bit about the particular challenges that elementary school students face with their peers and with their peer interactions. And how might parents support them in conversations around belonging, inclusion in these interactions with their peers?
Absolutely. And even though it's a bit of a pivot, I'm going to build on what Safa and Sana were both saying, because I think one of the biggest things that we see for our students across all ages and divisions is this idea of assumptions and making assumptions based on the things that we see visibly. And that can be physical appearance, it can be language, it can be behavior, right? And so assumptions are made by peers based on those things that are seen. And then there's so much more underneath, right, that we don't see. And those are so important to understand. And so that makes it challenging to kind of show who I am when you're making the assumption based on those other things. And so one of the things that we talk with parents a lot about is this idea of being curious, asking questions. When your child comes home with a story about something that happened in school, they're always going to have their perspective, but that perspective is about this size and the situation is this size, right? So it's asking those questions of your child. What do you think maybe was happening for the other students involved? Or how could you be an upstander? And I think that was something that Sana was touching on too, is if you noticed that something was happening that made you uncomfortable, how could you get support for your friend? How could you get support for your classmate that seems like things are not going well for them, rather than just making the assumption of, oh, that's a child that I don't want to be friends with, or I don't want you to be friends with that kid, right? And so those are some of the things that we talk about.
It's the idea of assumptions that comes up so frequently. I think we as humans are programmed to put people and things into boxes. I think about checklists and wanting to get things done and look after them, or I'm sure with us as teachers, looking after things for students to be able to resolve it for them. You as parents, that's going to be your automatic default. How can I fix this? But pausing and asking those questions is what you're saying, so we can understand the deeper perspectives and build the skills moving forward. That's really, really helpful. In middle school, you talked about identity changing all the time, the importance of peers becoming so much at the forefront. What are the challenges that the middle schoolers face, and how can parents help with those conversations?
Like I said before, middle school is a time of transformation and of interest, and so I think if your child is in middle school, I think it's really, really important to talk with them about empathy. And just being open-minded and being curious about other people and their experiences, while also showing that same curiosity towards your child, because as we discussed earlier, they might really, really love one thing and be all about that thing in 6th grade, and then suddenly 7th grade they're into a totally different thing, and you kind of just have to go along with them for the ride. And maybe they have best friends in 6th grade, like they're so close. And then in 7th grade, suddenly they don't talk anymore. But then they'll get back together in 8th grade. It's like constantly shifting and changing, and you just kind of have to be there to support them. And I think sometimes middle schoolers feel the stress of those changes. Because their brains are growing and they're becoming more mature, they're developing, they're becoming more socially aware. When I talk with kids, sometimes they just ask me why. Why do I really, really care about Power Rangers in 6th grade, and suddenly I think they're stupid in 7th grade? And I said, well, your brain just changes. It's just a structural thing happening. You're under construction right now. I tell them this all the time. And that's where the empathy piece comes in, right? Showing them that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not know what you're really into right now. It's okay to be really close to somebody and maybe they make other friends that are interested in things that are not Power Rangers. It's okay. You'll meet other friends who also like those things. And just telling kids that it's all right to sometimes not know the answers right away. Because honestly, I tell them I'm an adult and I still don't know most of the time. It's okay. And I think that's really, really important, even with the equity and inclusion piece, telling them that there are others around you who might be confused, who might be lost, and it's really important to be kind to them, to show empathy, to be curious, to allow them to make mistakes, and to allow yourself to make mistakes. And when we've had these middle school parent coffees, a lot of the conversations, whether we talk about books, we talk about technology, we talk about social media, we talk about kids and crushes and all those fun topics in the middle school, sometimes it can be overwhelming as a parent as well. And so just showing that same empathy and patience towards yourselves too, and modeling it for your children and saying, yeah, sometimes we're confused too, or sometimes things are overwhelming for us too. And so I think that just contributes to that whole discussion around belonging and identity, and just telling your kids, like, I'm there with you, and I recognize that things will change, recognize that your world is getting bigger, but I'm always with you and I'm here to support you. I think that's really important, especially for middle school.
Thank you, Joey. As we finish up our conversation, you've heard a lot about assumptions and identity and curiosity towards others. And one of the things that's coming through for me is how complex it is as parents to navigate this all, and how we used to think we had an absolute answer for everything. We had to be the all-knowing as educators and as parents, and now we know that we know very little, and that we're learning alongside our colleagues, our children, and sometimes their insights are actually framing the way we're thinking about something very differently. I don't know about you, but sometimes my kids say some things to me and I go, never really thought about it that way. And I think that is a really important part of what's coming out of our work with equity and inclusion, a perspective from our students' voices that we hadn't picked up on earlier. And so we really are making really intentional changes in teaching and learning around those conversations in student voice and learning. So thank you to our panelists. We're going to end with a very quick one sentence, because I want to have Q&A with the audience. So one sentence, what's your key takeaway around equity, inclusion, and belonging that you'd like to share with our audience? Sana, we'll start with you and go that way.
Trying to think of how to make it quick. I think at its core, it's about making sure you respect other people, and when you have those conversations, just to remember that to have an open mind, because sometimes your opinion might not be correct, sometimes the other person's point of view might not be correct in your opinion, but it's important to just take a deep breath and hear the other person out, and that's how we improve, and that's how things become better. That was one sentence.
I think I would say this idea around be curious, be open, and ask questions from a point of wanting to understand rather than wanting to be understood.
I'm also going to have a long one sentence. But kind of dive into what's uncomfortable. I think that is something that I have learned a lot in the past few years, is that there will be a lot of things in my own perspective that I'm not used to, or that I'm uncomfortable with, or that don't necessarily align with my values, but that doesn't mean that I can't respect them or understand them and get to know some context about them. So being able to do your own research, learn different perspectives on a topic that makes you uncomfortable, understand, and again, with that curious and open mind, kind of just frame your own knowledge for yourself.
I would say, just short and sweet, embrace uncertainty and be along for the ride, and show empathy towards everybody.
Great words. Curiosity, empathy, embracing the uncertainty. Sometimes just sitting in the uncomfortable moments can be really, really powerful, and learning from those. How do you navigate those? How do you sit with it? When you don't have to have all the answers. I'm looking at the time and recognizing that some of you may have places you need to be right after the 10:45 mark. So because of that, we will bring our session to a close with a few remarks, and we will have our panelists available, as well as Azra and I, if you are able to stay and keep the conversation going for the next 15 minutes or so, or you'd like to ask us some questions in smaller groups, please stay and enjoy those refreshments for that purpose. But we will want to come back to a close and look back and ground ourselves on these alumni quotes that are there. And it's funny because they're a lot of the same things, right? Keep asking the difficult conversations. Have open discourse on the contentious answers, right? Lean into that. And it says how those conversations can breed acceptance and understanding. Sometimes we want to shy away from polarizing conversations, but if we can lean in and truly listen to understand, we could get that acceptance and understanding. And the second quote is really about student input. We want to hear those student voices. Teachers and other adults don't know what happens within the community as a student, and it's not always comfortable to reach out. You never know what someone's going through until they shed light on the issues. Giving students the platform to speak out is really meaningful.
And we end with this last quote. ISKL, in hindsight, is amazing in terms of diversity and inclusion, and it doesn't get any better. It doesn't get better from my experience, but becoming complacent and accepting mediocrity is not the answer either. And so the idea that even as a school, as an organization, organizations around the world, we continue to grow and reflect and become more aware of issues and concerns and our opportunities to learn more about each other and support one another. So thank you for being here. If you have questions for us, please go ahead and ask. We'll get the mic around. For those of you who we recognize need to leave, feel free to have a great rest of the day. All right? So with that, thank you. Huge appreciation to our panel for their insights today. What questions might you have for our panelists? And you can direct it to them or Trina and I.
Lynn, would you like to start with what elementary school age that would be?
So I think one of the things to really think about is the wonderful experiences your daughter has had, right? And to build on those. And she's going to be building her identity and choosing parts of her identity to really focus on all her life as she's growing, right? And what she, I think, is going to really kind of come to is, as Sana was talking about, this third culture kid identity and connecting with other third culture kids. And any of the readings you do on third culture kids, and I can happily give you resources on that offline, is there are so many things that where kids are talking about connecting with other third culture kids, noticing that my background is, I may not really feel connected to my passport country, right? And I've been doing some reading. My daughter's getting ready to go off to college, and we've been doing some reading about how do you talk about your identity. And the author recommended having a 5-second answer, a 10-second answer, and a let's go out for coffee answer, which I think is really important because there are some people, we might just say, oh, I'm from Malaysia and leave it at that. There are some people we go, well, I've lived in all these different countries. And then there are some people that we're wanting to really build a relationship with, and let me tell you my story. But the main portion will really be for her to have her story and embrace her story. And all of these things are part of her story. And as she builds her story, she figures out where she really feels connected.
Sana, you've moved several times. It'd be interesting to hear the student voice. How have you been able to build your story?
I just wanted to say that when I was listening to that, I completely related. I mean, I'm maybe not 5 schools, but not a lot less than that. And if I'm being honest, it can be a bit isolating. It can be really frustrating. I think growing up, I always, when we would return to India, I would always feel bad because all these people would be like, oh, you have a strange accent. Where are you from? Are you British? And I'm like, no, I just go to a British school. Or are you American? No, I'm Indian. And then having to deal with that and having this disconnect to your culture. And it's difficult because in Malaysia, obviously, like, I mean, I can go to Little India, but that's not the same as having that connection with your culture. And I think growing up, that kind of made me want to avoid it completely. But now as I'm maturing, I'm realizing that it's actually a strength that I'm a third culture kid. When I was small, it felt like it was embarrassing that I couldn't speak Hindi. It was embarrassing that I had this disconnect. But now I realize that it's really a strength because I have the benefit of being a part of so many cultures. And you'll find more and more that there's a lot of people like this. I mean, almost every single one of my friends, I think all of them actually have the exact same experience. And I think it enriches you as a person, and I think as your daughter matures and grows older, she'll develop a stronger connection to her culture, because as I'm growing up, I am missing it. I feel like I want to be more connected to India, and I'm making more of an effort to, learn my language, ask my parents about, what was our family like, what's our history, what's our ancestry, and it's helping me feel not only connected to India, but also I'm able to celebrate my third culture kid identity too. So I think it will fix itself.
Any other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about managing polarities and tensions, right? And we have to do that as young adults. We have to do that as adults. And that disconnect, dissonance, incongruence, misalignment, you name the word, between what your own beliefs and values are and those of outside groups is one that we're constantly navigating. And so how do we bridge that gap as parents and as educators is really about the skills in between. Right. And so when we think about our ESLers and we think about communicating effectively or living ethically or collaborating constructively, it sounds like things that the kids just kind of rattle off. But really, when you dig down deep into the skills that it takes to be able to express an emotion that's actually got me all tangled up is something that we are actually giving language to in our social emotional curriculum. So it's really important that we're able to do that. A shared language, as you pointed out, is really important. And then being able to, as the panelists pointed out, is to recognize perspective and suspend judgment. And I think that that's really hard, is to suspend judgment and to have the open-mindedness to be able to listen attentively, listen to seek understanding, as opposed to making judgments or evaluations, is a skill that requires cultural humility. So as you were talking about cultural identity, we have to balance that with cultural humility. How do we suspend some of those thoughts? Trina?
And in those conversations, your children will come home and they will tell you all sorts of things about their interactions in the school and day to day. They are exposed to many different cultures here at ISKL. They're exposed to many different experiences online through the digital world as well. So they're going to come to you with perspectives, with viewpoints, with things that have been discussed that may not be as familiar to you or it may have them questioning some of the things that they've been brought up with. And that is an invitation for you as a parent to talk about what is true for your family's values and what is true for your beliefs, so they can be anchored in that and honor other beliefs and perspectives in the midst of that, because your children will need to be able to navigate multiple relationships and multiple perspectives and be able to work with people with many different backgrounds. So by being able to have that conversation and to lean into it and to show where you can still have your own values and form your own identity and stay true to it whilst honoring those values, perspectives of others, that's the important part of it. And here at the school, that's really what we're doing, is we're talking about that sense of belonging for for every student at the school, because that sense of belonging is going to strengthen their learning and their success in life. So more important than anything to us is rooting our students in a sense of identity and belonging, and the conversations in the classroom that come out of that will honor the perspectives of other people at a developmentally appropriate level. When your students come home with questions, as Lynn and Joey said before, you might not know how to respond at a level that's age appropriate. You might wonder where these questions or where these wonderings are coming from. So coming at it from a curiosity perspective, and maybe you don't know how to respond in the moment, it's okay to say, those are really good questions. I'm glad that you're being curious. You know, I'd like to learn a little bit more, and we're going to continue this conversation a little bit later if you're not ready in the moment. And then you can reach out to the counselors at the school to ask a little bit more about what is development appropriate, how you can navigate that particular conversation. The teachers here are here to help as well.
And with that, we are here to help. We are having conversation with our students. We are having conversations as educators, as leadership teams, to really talk about how to best navigate for our students the skills that they need to fill that gap that Rami had alluded to in his presentation. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your wonderful questions. We will be here for a few more minutes if you have just individual questions, but a huge round of applause for our panelists who've taken out time today to share their thoughts with us. Thank you for supporting ISKL, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.